The world is reduced to a singular, deafening scream of tearing metal. Inside the belly of the T-34, it is not a machine, but a living beast in its death throes. A searing shard of shrapnel embeds itself into the padded wall, inches from ahead. The air is a poisonous soup of cordite, burning oil, and the coppery tang of blood. Outside, through the mangled viewport, a landscape of hell flickers in orange and black. This is not a battle. This is a slaughterhouse. And in the commander's seat, a figure moves with a terrifying mechanical calm. Covered in grime and diesel slick, face a mask of soot and sweat. They are an extension of the dying machine. The voice that barks orders is a raw, guttural rasp, stripped of any identifiable age or origin, only pure function. Loader, armor-piercing, driver, reverse, right track, hard, now. The tank lurches violently, grinding against another burning hulk. A German Panzer IV slides into view, its gun searching. The commander's eyes, the only clear things in the grimy face, are chips of winter ice. Calculations spin in them, angles, distances, the sluggish rotation of the enemy turret. There is no fear, only geometry. Gun, traverse right, lead by 2, fire. The tank rocks, a flash, a thunderclap. The Panzer IV blossoms into a fireball. No cheer, just a cold, flat statement. Target destroyed. Driver, advance to grid 7, move. But then a lull. The immediate enemy is gone. The beast tank is crippled, smoking, but alive. The crew slumps in their seats, panting, the adrenaline receding to reveal the human terror beneath. The commander's hand goes to their side, where the torn uniform reveals a deep, bloody gash. The pain is a white-hot wire. They grit their teeth. The order comes crackling over the radio, fragmented. All units, fall back. Medical evacuation point Delta. The commander turns to the crew. The young loader is weeping silently, his hands shaking too violently to handle a new shell. The driver's face is pale, his knuckles white on the levers. They are boys looking to their leader for a sign, for humanity. And for a fraction of a second the mask slips. The commander looks at them, and in that gaze is not a fellow soldier's camaraderie, but something else, a fierce, almost maternal protectiveness, an unbearable weight of guilt for leading them here. It is a profoundly unmale look. It lasts less than a heartbeat. The ice returns. Abandon the vehicle, grab the wounded. We move to Point Delta. Now. They scramble out into the apocalyptic twilight. The air is cold and sharp with smoke. The commander is the last to leave, grabbing a satchel of documents. As they half climb, half fall from the hatch, a jagged piece of hull tears at their uniform, ripping the tunic open at the shoulder. They don't notice. At the makeshift medical tent, chaos reigns. Moans, shouts, the smell of antiseptic and death. A harried nurse with a bloody apron points. Over there, get in line. The commander stands, swaying slightly, the world blurring at the edges. The crew is being processed, patted down, led away. Their turn comes. A medical orderly, a large man with exhausted eyes, gestures. Sit, let's see that side. As the commander sits on a crate, the orderly pulls at the torn uniform to assess the wound. The fabric, already weakened, gives way further. Beneath the rough wool and the tight, crude bindings meant to flatten the chest, a strip of pale, smooth skin is revealed. Skin that speaks of a different anatomy, a different life. The orderly's hands freeze. His tired eyes widen, then narrow in slow, dawning comprehension. He is not looking at a wound anymore. He is looking at the binding. He is looking at the shape it tries to constrain. His gaze travels up from the revealed skin to the commander's face, the sharp jawline now seeming fragile, the soot-smeared lips, the wide, defiant eyes holding his stare. The air crackles with silent, mortal danger. This is not about a wound. This is about a secret. That in this army at this time is a crime, punishable by a tribunal or a bullet in a damp cellar. The orderly's mouth opens. He is about to speak, to call for an officer. The commander does not beg, does not look away. Their blood-smeared hand comes up, not to cover the exposed skin, but to grip the orderly's wrist with a strength that surprises them both. The grip is iron, a veteran's grip. The eyes that lock onto his are no longer those of a woman caught, but of a battlefield commander who has just zeroed in on the primary threat. There is a warning in that stare, a history of 20 kills, a promise of consequences. The orderly hesitates. He sees the blood, the grime, the cold fury. He sees the crew waiting nearby, loyal, armed. He hears the distant thunder of artillery. In this moment, the absurd, monumental truth of the person before him clashes with the immediate, brutal reality of the front. His duty as a medic wars with the unwritten law of the trenches. He says nothing. With a sharp, almost angry motion, he yanks a field dressing from his bag. He doesn't gently treat the wound. He slaps the thick pad over the gash and the torn fabric, binding it all together, the injury and the secret, under layers of stark white gauze. His work is rough, efficient, final. He is not healing. He is sealing a tomb. When he finishes, he gives the commander one last, unreadable look, a mix of shock, resentment, and a twisted respect. He just jerks his thumb towards the exit. Next, the commander stands, the world swimming. They walk past their crew, who nod with relief. They find a dark, quiet corner behind a burned-out truck, collapsing against the cold metal. Only then, alone in the darkness, do the tremors begin. Not from the pain of the wound, but from the sheer precipice edge of the disaster just avoided. They fumble with the bloodied bindings, pulling them tighter with shaking, desperate hands, vanishing the truth once more. They close their eyes, and the present dissolves. The memory crashes in, not as a thought, but as a sensory flood. 72 days earlier. The recruitment office stinks of cheap tobacco, wet wool, and fear. A line of men, boys really, shuffles forward. Among them stands Anna, not as a woman pretending, but as a creature already half-forged. Her hair is shorn to the scalp with rusty shears, leaving angry nicks. Her own clothes are gone, traded for a stiff, stinking uniform that hangs on her frame. She has used dirt and ash, not just on her face, but has carefully rubbed it into the skin of her neck and hands to mimic the permanent grime and pores of a man. She has studied the posture of exhaustion, the hollow-cheeked stare of the hungry, but it is her eyes that have already changed. They hold none of the nervous anticipation of the others. They hold the same winter ice focus we saw in the tank. She is not here to join the army. She is here to infiltrate a fortress. The first test is the medical inspection. A bored, overworked doctor in a dirty coat waves men behind a stained screen. Stripped to the waist. Cough. Anna's turn comes. Her heartbeat is a cannon in her ears. She moves behind the screen. She turns her back to the room, her movements deliberate, slow. She has rehearsed this 1,000 times in her mind. She removes the tunic. Beneath it, her torso is a landscape of constraint, a complex, cruel harness of torn sheeting and bandages, wound so tight it distorts her breathing, creating a flat, almost concave chest. The skin underneath is raw, chafed. It is a cage of her own making. The doctor approaches. He smells of vodka and sweat. He doesn't look at her face. He listens to her back with a cold stethoscope, the sound of her heart frantic but muffled. He prods her kidneys. Cough. She coughs, the bindings digging like knives. Turn. This is the moment. She turns, keeping her shoulders hunched, her arms slightly forward to alter the silhouette. The doctor's glazed eyes sweep over the bound chest, the raw skin, the sharp collarbones. He sees what he expects to see. Another underfed, pathetic youth. To him, the bindings are just ragged underclothes. The raw skin is just dirt and poverty. He has seen 1,000 broken bodies. This is just one more. He scribbles on a form. Fit for service. Next. Anna puts her tunic back on, the wool scraping against her wounds. She does not feel relief. She feels the first click of a lock sliding into place. The prison door has shut. She is now Private Alexei Volkov. The girl named Anna is buried under the layers of linen and lies. She walks out of the office into the gray light. A train of cattle cars waits, steam hissing. Men are being herded into them. She looks at her hands, already dirty, already looking like they could belong to someone else. She doesn't look back. There is nothing to look back for. She climbs into the dark, stinking carriage. The door slams shut with a final, metallic shriek. In the darkness, surrounded by the murmurs and sobs of strangers, Alexei Volkov closes their eyes. The only thing that exists now is the forward momentum, the path to the front, to the steel beast that will become both her coffin and her sanctuary. The memory of the medical orderly's shocked face in the future is still a ghost, a premonition of the perpetual, high-wire act of survival that has just begun. The forging in fire is already underway. The train journey is a descent into a new collective purgatory. The cattle car is a rolling coffin of unwashed bodies, vomit, and a silence thick with dread. Alexei Volkov sits in a corner, back against the shuddering wall, eyes open in the near darkness. Sleep is a vulnerability they cannot afford. They observe. They learn the rhythm of male camaraderie, the rough jokes that cover fear, the shared cigarettes passed like sacred offerings, the way men slump against each other for warmth, unconscious in their trust. Alexei remains a statue, refusing the offered smoke, the shared blanket. They cultivate an aura of unapproachable intensity. They are not one of them. They are a weapon being transported. The destination is not a front-line trench, but a vast, muddy plain, churned by tank treads and boot heels, the armored training ground at Kazan. Here, the air vibrates with a different kind of violence. The roaring symphony of diesel engines, the shriek of grinding metal, the concussive thud of test-fired guns. It is a forge for steel and men. The new recruits are assembled before a row of T-34s. A chief instructor, a man with a face like cracked leather and the eyes of a disappointed vulture, paces before them. He doesn't shout. His voice is a low, gravelly saw that cuts through the engine noise. "You are nothing," he states, a simple, cold fact. "You are less than the mud on my boots. That," he jerks a thumb towards the tanks, "is everything. Your mother is now 5 centimeters of rolled steel. Your father is a 12-cylinder diesel. Your holy trinity is the gun, the optics, the radio. You will learn its every sigh, its every groan. You will love it more than your life, because it is your life." The recruits are broken into crews. Alexei is assigned to a T-34 with a battered, weathered look, its paint scarred from previous trainees. Their crew is a portrait of despair and dysfunction. The driver is a man in his 40s called Dead, short for grandfather. He is a former tractor mechanic from Siberia, with thick, scarred hands and a permanent squint. He looks at the T-34 not with awe, but with the weary scrutiny of a man assessing a broken-down machine. He is a skeptic, an immovable object. The loader is a boy, no more than 18, with a shock of blonde hair and wide, perpetually startled eyes. They call him Moloko, Milk. He is all clumsy limbs and nervous energy, his hands fumbling with the dummy shells during the first drill. The gunner is Ogani, meaning fire. He is all sharp angles and coiled tension, a former factory worker from the Urals with a volatile temper, and a marksman's focus that flickers in and out like a bad connection. The radio operator is Krolik, Rabbit, a small, twitchy man who jumps at every backfire, his superstitious nature already weaving omens from bird flights and cloud shapes. And then there is Alexei, their assigned commander, the boy soldier with the silent stare. The first time they climb into the tank together, it is a disaster of clashing egos and claustrophobia. The interior is not a cabin. It is a mechanical womb, smelling of grease, cold metal, and human sweat. Dead takes the driver's seat, his large frame filling the compartment. He immediately criticizes the clutch feel, muttering about inferior manufacturing. Ogani brushes past Alexei to get to the gunner's seat, his elbow a deliberate jab. Moloko gets tangled in his own feet. Krolik whispers a prayer, touching the steel walls as if for luck. Alexei slides into the commander's hatch. The perspective is transformative. From here, they are not a person. They are the brain of the beast. They look through the vision blocks, seeing the world divided into segments. They feel the immense, latent power of the machine humming beneath them. In this seat, the bindings on their chest, the pretense in their voice, the constant fear, it all fades into background noise. Here, there is only the machine, the crew, and the objective. It is a terrifying, intoxicating clarity. The first practical exercise is simple. Navigate a basic obstacle course. Dead is at the controls. The tank lurches forward, stalls, jerks again, throwing everyone against the hard metal. Ogani swears viciously. Moloko yelps as a dummy shell rolls. Driver, Alexei's voice cuts through the chaos. It is not loud. It is flat, controlled, a command issued in a vacuum. You are fighting the gearbox. You are not its master. Feel the engagement point. Do not force it. Dead's head whips around, his eyes blazing with resentment. A boy telling him about machinery? He snarls something, turns back, and deliberately grinds the gears again. The instructor's voice crackles over the radio, cold and sharp. Crew 2, you are a disgrace. A single rifle grenade would turn you into a tin can of stew. Again, from the start. Humiliation hangs thick in the oily air. Alexei feels the crew's collective failure like a physical weight. They do not look at their commander. They are a shattered unit. That night, in the barracks, the alienation is complete. The other crews bond over shared misery, a bottle of illicit samagon. Alexei sits on their bunk, methodically cleaning their boots, an island of silent focus. Dead watches them from across the room, his expression unreadable. The turning point comes not on the field, but in the classroom. It is a theoretical lesson on deflection shooting, leading a moving target. The instructor draws a complex diagram on the board involving speed, angle, shell velocity. He asks for a solution. The room is silent, men staring blankly. Ogany frowns, trying to visualize it. Dead looks bored. Alexei, from the back of the room, speaks. Their voice is still that low, rasping monotone. Your formula is simplified for stationary targets, instructor. You have not accounted for the lateral drift coefficient of the F-34 gun at extreme range, nor the reduced muzzle velocity of a cold barrel in winter conditions. The lead you have drawn is insufficient by approximately 15%. The silence that follows is absolute. The instructor freezes, chalk in hand. He is not used to being corrected, least of all by a raw recruit. He walks slowly to the back, staring down at Alexei. And you know this, how, Volkov? I read the factory ballistics reports and the field maintenance logs from the Stalingrad front, Alexei states, looking not at the instructor, but at the flawed diagram on the board. It is not arrogance. It is the simple recitation of data. The data is in the library annex, Volume 4. The instructor's eyes narrow, not in anger, but in reappraisal. He turns and silently corrects the diagram. The lesson continues. Afterward, Ogany glances at Alexei with a flicker of something new. Not warmth, but a dawning, wary respect. Dead says nothing, but his skepticism now has a crack in it. The next day on the range, it is a live-fire exercise against a towed sled simulating a moving vehicle. Crew after crew misses, their shells throwing up geysers of dirt behind or in front of the target. The pressure mounts. When it is their turn, the atmosphere inside the tank is electrically tense. Dead guides the tank into position with a new, grudging smoothness. Ogany peers through the sight, his jaw tight. Range 400, moving left to right. Alexei's mind becomes a cold, clear computer. They filter out the vibration, the smell, the fear. They see the numbers, the angles. The instructor's corrected diagram overlays their vision. Gunner, target, lead by 3 marks, not 2, 3. The command is absolute. Ogany hesitates. The manual says 2. He opens his mouth to protest, meets Alexei's gaze in the periscope reflection, a gaze of pure, unshakable certainty. He adjusts. Lead 3. Set. Fire. The tank bucks. The shell screams across the field. For a heart-stopping second, there is nothing. Then, the sled target disintegrates in a perfect, flaming hit. A direct, obliterating strike. Inside the tank, the noise of the hit is followed by a different silence. It is the silence of shock, of a shared, impossible success. Moloko lets out a stifled gasp. Krolik touches his rabbit's foot pendant, his eyes wide. Ogany stares through the sight at the destruction, a slow, fierce grin spreading across his face for the first time. Dead, in his compartment, allows himself a single sharp nod, felt more than seen. Alexei does not celebrate. They key the radio. Crew 2, target destroyed. But as they say the words, they feel a seismic shift within the steel walls. The resentment has evaporated, replaced by a raw, tentative awe. They are no longer just the strange, silent boy. They are the one who knew. They are the brain that made the beast strike true. That evening, Dead walks past Alexei's bunk. He doesn't stop, doesn't look, but as he passes, he drops a small, grease-stained, cloth-wrapped object onto the blanket. Alexei unwraps it. It is a finely crafted, hand-tooled leather strop for sharpening a razor. A soldier's personal luxury. A gift. No words are exchanged. Alexei holds the cool leather, running a thumb over its surface. This is more dangerous than any suspicion. This is the beginning of acceptance. This is the first fragile thread of brotherhood, binding them to these men. The prison of their deception has just become more comfortable and infinitely more perilous. They have earned their place not as a woman among men, but as a commander among soldiers. The cage door has locked from the inside. The world before was training. The world after is a freight train of screaming metal heading into the sun. They are no longer crew two. They are a piece of living ammunition loaded onto a flatbed train car, their T-34 chained down like a chained predator, grinding westward into the heart of the summer offensive. The air changes. It becomes thick with the distant, never-ending thunder, a sound felt in the teeth and bones before it is heard by the ears. It smells of burning, vast and ancient, of scorched earth and things that should not be. Their arrival is not to a front line, but to a swirling, chaotic vortex of retreat and desperate counterpunch. A harried major with a blood-stained bandage on his head points a shaking finger at a map, then at them, his eyes not seeing individuals, only a resource. That wood line, the village of Novaya Zhizn, it's gone. Germans have pushed through. You will support the rifle battalion holding the tree line east of the river. You will hold until sunset, or until you are dead. There is no grand speech, only coordinates. The T-34 rumbles off the train, its tracks biting into the churned mud of the rear area. They pass a column of walking wounded, men with vacant eyes, their uniforms in tatters. They pass burning trucks. The reality of war is no longer a concept. It is a landscape. Alexei, inside the commander's hatch, feels a coldness seeping into their core that has nothing to do with fear. It is a glacial focus, a shutting down of every human process not dedicated to survival and function. They watch Dead's back through the open driver's hatch, see the tension in his shoulders. They hear Moloko's rapid, shallow breathing over the intercom. They see Ogoni compulsively wiping the lens of his gun sight. Krolik is muttering a continuous, desperate stream of incantations. They reach the position, a ragged line of infantrymen dug into shallow scrapes in the black earth. They look up at the arriving tank with a mix of hope and exhaustion. The T-34 takes up a hull-down position behind a low rise, its gun just peeking over. The wait is an eternity, compressed into minutes. The world holds its breath. The only sound is the idling rumble of their diesel and the flies buzzing over the mud. Then the universe erupts. It begins with a shriek tearing the sky apart, ending in a cataclysmic impact 50 meters to their left. Dirt and shrapnel patter against the armor, like hellish rain. Then another, and another. An artillery barrage walks towards them, a giant stomping through the earth. Inside the tank, the world becomes a violent, shaking, deafening bell. The sound is not outside. It is inside their skulls. The air fills with the acrid dust of shaken earth and the smell of their own cold sweat. Moloko screams, a raw animal sound lost in the cacophony. "Driver, start engines. Move to alternate position. Now." Alexei's voice is a razor of pure will, cutting through the panic. It is not their voice. It is the voice of the machine. Dead, his face a mask of primal terror, obeys. The tank lurches backwards, grinding through the smoking craters. A shell lands where they were just parked, the concussion wave slamming into them, ringing the steel hull like a gong. Men's ears pop, vision blurs. As the barrage lifts, the true horror appears through the settling smoke. Shapes. Gray-green monsters gliding through the shattered tree line. 2 Panzer IIIs, their long guns searching like insect stingers, supported by scurrying infantry. Enemy tanks! 2 o'clock! Gunner! Sabot! Loader! Speed! Alexei's commands are metronomic, devoid of emotion. They are calling out a deadly recipe. Ogoni is frozen, his eye glued to the sight, his hand trembling on the traverse. I can't. Gunner! Traverse right. Lead the lead vehicle by 1 body length. Do it now. The command brooks no argument. It is a lifeline thrown into a storm. Ogoni's training takes over. His hand steadies. The electric motor whines as the turret swings. Moloko, sobbing with effort, slams the long, sleek sabot round into the breech. Up! Fire! The gun roars. The tank recoils violently. The shot is a blur. It strikes the lead Panzer III on the glacis plate, a flash of sparks, but it deflects, screeching off into the sky. A miss. Number A, non-penetration. Reload! Armor-piercing, high explosive. Driver, hard left. Move us behind that burned-out hut. The German tank's gun flashes. A geyser of earth erupts 10 meters in front of them, showering the hull with debris. The 2nd Panzer III is fanning out, trying to flank. Infantry bullets ping and zing off the armor, a sound like angry bees. Adrenaline is a poison that clouds judgment. Alexei forces it down, drowning it in a flood of icy calculus. The deflect. The angle was wrong. The German tank is angled towards them. They need a side shot. They need to move. Driver, reverse now. Gunner, target the track of the 2nd tank. Aim low. Dead throws the tank backwards with a wrenching turn. The world spins in the vision blocks. Ogoni frantically tries to keep the sight on target as they move. The German gun fires again. This time, the hit is a colossal, deafening hammer blow on their frontal armor. The inside of the tank lights up with a blinding flash of sparks as the sloped steel does its job, deflecting the shell upwards with a terrifying screech. But the shockwave is brutal. A control panel cracks. A small electrical fire erupts near Krolik, who bats at it wildly. They are rocking, stunned. Alexei's head smacks against the periscope, seeing stars. They taste blood in their mouth from a bitten tongue. The pain is a distant signal. They blink, and the world snaps back into hyper-clarity. They have reversed into a slight depression. The flanking Panzer III, overeager, has pushed forward, exposing its side profile for a critical moment. Gunner, now, center mass, fire. Ogoni, half blind from the impact, fires on instinct. The shell strikes the German tank just below the turret. There is no glorious explosion. There is a muted crump, and then a jet of brilliant white fire erupts from every hatch, every vision slit, as the ammunition cooks off. The turret sits, a funeral pyre, the first kill. But there is no time. The 1st Panzer III is turning, bringing its gun to bear. The commander knows they are out of position, vulnerable. They see the infantry, their own, being cut down by machine gun fire. A cold, ruthless equation forms in their mind. Driver, forward, ramming speed, aim for its flank. Dead, without a second's hesitation, slams the levers forward. The T-34's engine screams in protest as it surges out of the depression, not away from the enemy tank, but directly at it, a steel avalanche. The German tank commander, expecting another duel, is caught utterly by surprise. He tries to swing his gun, but it's too slow. The T-34, 30 tons of furious momentum, slams into the Panzer III's side with a sound of apocalyptic, tearing metal. Tracks grind, steel screams. The German tank is knocked sideways, its tracks ripped off, immobilized. Gunner! Point blank! Fire! Ogoni doesn't even aim. The muzzle is almost touching the enemy's shattered flank. He fires. The result is catastrophic and intimate. The blast is contained, directed inward. The enemy tank simply comes apart from the inside, plates buckling, hatches blowing open. Silence, sudden and shocking, descends over their immediate vicinity. The supporting German infantry, seeing their armor destroyed, falter and fall back. Inside the T-34, the silence is heavier. It is the silence of the tomb they have just survived. The air is thick with the smell of cordite, burned wiring, vomit, and the unmistakable sweet iron scent of blood. Someone is cut, maybe all of them. Alexei's body is trembling with the aftermath of the adrenaline dump. They look through the periscope. The two enemy tanks are burning tombs. Their own infantry is cheering weakly, waving. Then, Alexei's gaze falls to the interior. Moloko is curled in a fetal position by the spent shell casings, weeping uncontrollably. Krolik is rocking back and forth, his face smeared with soot from the fire. Ogany is staring at his hands, which are shaking violently. Dead is just breathing. Deep, ragged gulps of the foul air. And Alexei realizes something. In the heat of the fight, there was no pretense, no man, no woman, only the will to survive and the calculus of death. Their voice had commanded, and these men, in their terror, had obeyed not a persona, but the cold, clear logic of survival. They key the intercom. Their voice is hoarse, cracked, but calm. Crew status, report. One by one, shaky voices come back. Driver, functional. Gunner, functional. Loader, I'm okay. Radio, operational. First combat mission complete, Alexei states, the official term absurd in the context of the carnage they've just wrought and endured. Mark 1 kill on the gun barrel. But the order is not given out of pride. It is a ritual, a way to anchor them back to reality, to purpose. It is the first stitch in the wound of their shattered nerves. As they wait for further orders, the crew does not look at their commander with resentment or doubt. They look at them with the wide-eyed, shell-shocked awe of men who have followed someone through the gates of hell and, impossibly, walked back out. The ice in Alexei's veins kept them alive. They don't know what that ice is made of. They only know they need its coldness to survive the fire. The baptism is complete. The machine and the beast are now one. And at its core, beating with a heart of pure, calculated will, is a secret more explosive than any shell in the ammo rack. Time on the front is not measured in days, but in rituals. The ritual of loading the ammunition racks at dawn, the metallic clink of shells, a grim prayer. The ritual of checking the engine oil, thick and black as blood. The ritual of wiping down the optics until the world outside is a deceptively clear, sharp-edged lie. And the newest, most sacred ritual, the marking of the gun barrel. After the battle at Novaya Zhizn, it was Moloko, his hands finally steady, who found a piece of white, chalky stone. With a reverent touch, he drew a small, lopsided star on the gray metal near the muzzle brake. One star. A monument to the burning Panzer IIIs. It was not an act of celebration, but of exorcism. A way to transfer the memory from their minds onto the cold steel. With each engagement, the ritual evolved. The star for the second kill, a German assault gun ambushed in a village lane, was drawn by Ogany, his mark precise and fierce. The third, a half-track bristling with infantry, obliterated by high explosive at point-blank range, was Krolik's contribution. His star was small, neat, surrounded by a tiny protective circle, scratched into the paint. By the 5th star, they had developed a style. The stars were now bold, white slashes of paint stolen from a maintenance truck, each one slightly different, a collective signature. The crew of the T-34, once a dysfunctional collection of strangers, had fused into a single organism. They were no longer Crew 2. To the infantry they supported, they were the Star Bearers. To the rear echelon gossips, they were the Ghost Tank, appearing where the line was weakest, striking with unnerving surgical ferocity, and vanishing back into the smoke. Their reputation was a living thing, growing with each white mark on the barrel. Inside the steel womb, a new family was born. In the lulls between movements, crammed into the earthy darkness of a dugout, or the cramped interior of their tank, their own rituals took hold. Dead would meticulously clean and oil his precious driving gloves, sharing his Makorka tobacco, which they all smoked, the harsh smoke blending with the ever-present scent of fuel and fear. Moloko would talk, in a hushed, wistful tone, about his mother's pies, describing the taste of cherries and dough until their mouths watered, a shared hunger for a lost world. Ogani, his volatile temper softened by exhaustion, would quietly sharpen his knife on a stone, the rhythmic shink-shink a comforting metronome. Krolik read their fortunes in the patterns of tea leaves at the bottom of a shared tin cup, predicting a long journey or a meeting with a black bird. His superstitions now tolerated, even secretly relied upon. And Alexei, the commander, was the silent nucleus around which this galaxy orbited. They spoke little, ate less, and slept in short, alert bursts, always closest to the hatch. Their commands were law, their calm in battle a sacred text. They had earned a space of terrifying privacy. No one questioned why they changed clothes in absolute darkness, or vanished for brief, tense moments behind a screen of tarps for necessary functions. Their brilliance was their shield. Their strangeness was accepted as the price of genius, the eccentricity of a battlefield savant. They were their talisman. This fragile, hard-won sanctuary was first breached not by a German shell, but by a gaze. They were at a regimented refueling point in a shattered forest, a rare moment of semi-security in the rear. A ZIS truck had arrived with post, a moment of profound, simple joy. Letters from home were poured over, tears were shed, laughter echoed, a sound so foreign it was startling. A political officer, a Zampolit, arrived with the mail. He was a captain, clean where everyone else was dirty, his uniform neatly pressed, his eyes pale and moist, like 2 chips of ice melting. He moved through the men with a smile that didn't touch his eyes, dispensing party slogans like cheap candy. His name was Captain Sokolov. His gaze swept over the celebrated crew, lingering on their painted gun barrel. He offered congratulations, his voice smooth as oil. Then his eyes settled on Alexei. The look was different. It was not the appraising stare of a soldier, or the awed glance of a junior officer. It was dissection. He looked at Alexei's smooth, hairless jaw, at the strangely delicate lines of their grime-streaked neck where the uniform collar gaped, at their hands, small but scarred and strong. He looked at the way they stood, a posture of coiled containment that defied easy categorization. "Lieutenant Volkov," Sokolov said, the smile still plastered on his face. "A phenomenal record. 5 kills in as many weeks. The stuff of legend." Alexei merely nodded, a curt, minimal gesture. "One wonders," Sokolov continued, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that felt like a trap. "Where such precision is born. You are from Gorky, the files say, a factory worker. Yet you handle ballistics like a professor. You speak like someone who has read more than assembly manuals." The air grew cold. Dead, sensing danger, subtly shifted his bulk, obscuring Sokolov's direct line of sight to Alexei. Ogany's hand, holding his letter, went still. "The library had many manuals, Captain." Alexei's voice was flat, the practiced rasp perfect. "I had a good memory for numbers. It is no mystery." "No mystery," Sokolov echoed, his ice-chip eyes drinking in every micro-expression, every controlled breath. "Of course. Yet in my experience, such singular focus often comes from a singular drive, a personal motive, perhaps. Something to prove." He let the words hang. The implication was a venomous flower, cowardice, overcompensation, hidden shame. "My motive is the destruction of fascists on Soviet soil," Alexei recited the perfect, unimpeachable line, their gaze meeting his without flinching. It was a contest of coldnesses, and Alexei's was forged in fire and steel. Sokolov's smile finally vanished, replaced by a look of chilly interest. He had not gotten what he wanted, but he had smelled something, a scent that didn't belong. Not treason, perhaps, but an anomaly. And in his world, anomalies were puzzles to be solved, and solving puzzles was power. "Of course, Lieutenant," he said softly. "Carry on. Glory to the motherland." He left, but his shadow remained. In the days that followed, Alexei felt it. A question asked of a supply sergeant about Volkov's requisition forms. A casual conversation Sokolov had with Krolik about the commander's pre-battle habits. The shadow was probing, seeking a crack in the legend. The pressure, constant and hydraulic, now had a new source. It was no longer just the enemy over the ridge. It was the polite, relentless suspicion from within their own ranks. Alexei's world, which had narrowed to the interior dimensions of a tank and the minds of their crew, now had a silent, observing third eye. Every move, every word was potentially under examination. The brilliant, eccentric commander was now a person of interest. That night, during a rare hour of sentry duty, Alexei stood alone under a vast, star-flecked sky. The silence was a physical weight. They allowed themselves one deep, shuddering breath, a moment where the bindings felt not like armor, but like a slowly tightening shroud. They thought of the crew sleeping nearby, trusting them with their lives. They thought of Sokolov's wet, inquisitive eyes. The front was a maelstrom of visible, explosive danger, but this was a different war, a silent, patient, bureaucratic war of documents and glances, fought in the shadows behind the lines. And in this war, a single slip, a single medical check, a single moment of misplaced trust would not result in a hero's death in a steel coffin. It would mean a dark cellar, a shameful accusation, and a betrayal of the very men who now looked at the white stars on their gun with a reverence that bordered on faith. The ice in their veins had to grow colder, harder, more impenetrable than ever. The performance was no longer just for the crew. The most critical audience now wore a Soviet uniform and a smile that hid a knife. The advance had turned into a grinding crawl through a landscape of broken teeth. The town, once named on maps as something hopeful, was now a jagged silhouette of blackened rafters and skeletal walls. Their T-34, its hull streaked with dried mud and soot, moved like a weary predator down the corpse of the main street. The white stars on the barrel, now 8 in number, stood out, like stark, proud scars. Inside, the crew operated with a quiet, weary synchronicity. Words were minimal. A grunt from Dead as he navigated around a crater. A muttered range from Agony. The solid clunk of a shell from Moloko. They were extensions of the machine, and the machine was an extension of Alexei's will. The ambush was not a thunderclap, but a trap sprung with silent, surgical precision. A hidden anti-tank gun, a long-barreled German pack camouflaged in the rubble of a collapsed bakery, fired first. The shot was a streak of tungsten, a meteor of pure malice. It did not miss. The impact was not the colossal ringing hammer blow of a tank shell on their frontal armor. It was a sharper, more vicious sound, a high-velocity punch followed by the screech of tortured metal being violated. The shell struck the side of the turret just below the commander's cupola. It did not fully penetrate the hardened steel, but it did not need to. It was a kinetic kill of a different kind. Inside, the world dissolved into a storm of white-hot sparks and razor-sharp spall. A cloud of metal fragments, torn from the tank's own innards by the force of the impact, ricocheted around the fighting compartment like angry hornets. Alexei was thrown sideways, their heads smashing against the radio set. Stars exploded behind their eyes. A searing electric pain erupted in their left shoulder and upper chest, so intense and sudden it stole the breath from their lungs. They looked down. A jagged, dark piece of shrapnel, smoking and the size of a man's thumb, was buried deep in the meat of their shoulder, just above the collarbone. Their uniform tunic was already soaking through with a warm, spreading darkness. But the machine was wounded, not dead. Warning lights flickered on the panel. A hydraulic line hissed, spraying oily mist. Ogani was shouting, clutching a bleeding gash on his forehead. Moloko was screaming about fire. Through the blinding haze of pain, Alexei's training, that icy core of pure function, seized control. The body was screaming, but the mind was a clear, cold stream. They assessed the damage through a gray tunnel of encroaching shock. The gun was operational. The engine still roared. Dead was already throwing them into reverse, backing them violently behind the shattered wall of a house, out of the direct line of fire. "Gunner! Suppressing fire! High explosive! On the bakery coordinates! Loader! Status!" Alexei's voice was a ragged gasp, but it held the familiar, unbreakable thread of command. "I'm okay. Gun ready." Moloko's voice was pitched high with terror, but he was moving. Ogani, wiping blood from his eyes, found the target. The turret whined, the gun roared. A chunk of the bakery vanished in a cloud of dust and debris. The return fire from the Germans became sporadic, disorganized. The immediate threat was masked, but the real crisis was inside the tank. "Commander, you're hit!" Krolik's voice was a shrill note of panic. He was staring at the dark, wet stain blossoming across Alexei's chest and shoulder. "It is nothing. A scratch. Maintain your posts." The lie was automatic, absolute. But the world was beginning to tilt. Alexei could feel the strength leaking out of them with each pulse of blood. The pain was a living thing, gnawing at the edges of their consciousness. They knew the shrapnel was deep. They knew it needed to come out. The wound needed to be cleaned, packed, stitched. They knew that meant a medic. A medic meant exposure. The battalion order came crackling over the radio. The infantry was pinned. Their tank was needed to spearhead a push to clear the street. It was a suicidal order. from a desperate command. Dead heard it. Ogoni heard it. They all looked at their commander, who was now pale, breathing in short, sharp gasps, one hand clamped over the wound, blood seeping through their fingers. To leave for medical aid was to abandon their crew, their infantry, the mission. It was to betray the very identity they had built. It was also the only sane physical choice. Alexei made the calculation. The ice won. Driver, advance, slow and steady. Gunner, watch for secondary positions. We are not done here. The crew's disbelief was a tangible force in the cramped space, but the command was given. Dead, his face a grim mask of anguish and admiration, engaged the gears. The T-34 lurched forward, back into the kill zone. What followed was a 20-minute eternity of pure, hellish endurance. Alexei commanded through a thickening fog, their voice growing weaker, but never losing its clarity. They directed fire onto a machine gun nest. They called out a hidden Panzerfaust team that Ogoni obliterated. They navigated Dead through a labyrinth of rubble under sporadic sniper fire. All the while, the warm seep of blood continued, pooling in the seat of their overalls, dripping onto the spent shell casings at their feet. Their left arm went numb, useless. They used their right hand to stabilize themselves, to point, to key the intercom. The world narrowed to the circle of the vision block, the sound of Ogoni's voice, and the cold, anchoring pain. When the street was finally cleared, the German resistance melted away. The tank was a wreck. Smoke poured from overheated engines. But it was alive. They had survived. At the battalion aid station, a scene of organized chaos in a damp cellar, the real trial began. Alexei, lightheaded and leaning heavily on Krolik, was pushed towards a triage area. A female medic, her face pinched with exhaustion and age beyond her years, took one look at the bloody tunic and pointed to a curtained-off alcove. "In there. I'll be right there." The alcove was dim, lit by a single kerosene lamp. Alexei's mind, fogged by blood loss, screamed in silent alarm. This was it. The perimeter was breached. They fumbled with their good hand, trying to unbutton the tunic, to somehow assess the damage alone, to find a way to lie, to disguise. Before they could, the curtain was pulled aside. It was not the older medic. It was a younger woman, a surgeon or a senior nurse, her eyes dark-circled but frighteningly alert. She carried a tray of instruments that clinked with a sound of finality. "Let me see, Lieutenant," she said, her voice not unkind, but devoid of patience. This was a factory floor, and bodies were broken machinery. "It's not deep, I can—" Alexei began, the rasp in their voice more pronounced. "I will be the judge of that. The tunic. Now." There was no refusing. Alexei, their defenses crumbling with their strength, allowed the woman to help pull the blood-soaked, shredded tunic over their head. The movement was agony, a white-hot fire in their shoulder. The cool, damp air of the cellar hit their skin. And there it was. The complex, crude harness of bandages now stained a deep, ominous red around the entry wound, but unmistakable in its purpose. It bound the chest, flattening it into a harsh, unnatural plane. The smooth skin of the back, the narrow waist, all the truths the uniform hid, were laid bare in the flickering lamplight. The nurse surgeon froze. Her hands, about to probe the wound, stopped in midair. Her eyes, which had seen every horror of war, widened in genuine, stunned disbelief. They flicked from the binding to the wound to Alexei's face, the sharp, pale features, the soot-stained but delicate jawline now clearly visible without the bulk of the collar. The pieces crashed together in her mind with an almost audible sound. For a long, suspended moment, they stared at each other. In the nurse's eyes, Alexei saw the shock, the confusion, the dawning understanding of the monumental, terrifying deception. They saw the professional calculating the medical implications, the woman recognizing the profound sacrifice, and the Soviet citizen seeing a capital crime. Alexei had no strength left for defiance. They just looked back, their gaze hollow, accepting. The ice had melted, leaving only exhaustion and the quiet expectation of the end. The nurse's lips tightened. She did not cry out. She did not call for the political officer. She let out a slow, controlled breath, as if steadying herself for a complex and dangerous operation. Without a word, she picked up a pair of heavy surgical scissors. The metallic snick as she opened them was the loudest sound in the world. She did not reach for the bindings to remove them. Instead, she carefully cut through the bloody bandages only around the wound site, creating a small surgical window to the shredded flesh beneath. Her movements were swift, precise, and utterly focused on the injury, and only the injury. She probed, extracted the shard of shrapnel with a firm pull that made Alexei gasp, cleaned the torn flesh with alcohol that burned like the sun, and packed and bandaged the wound with expert efficiency. The entire time she worked in silence, her eyes never meeting Alexei's again. It was as if she had seen nothing but the trauma. When she was finished, she took a fresh long roll of bandage. But instead of just dressing the shoulder, she began to rewrap the chest harness, tightening it, securing it, reconstructing the lie with her own hands. Her touch was neither gentle nor rough. It was methodical, like an engineer repairing faulty armor. Finally, she helped Alexei slip the ruined but now concealing tunic back on. Only then did she look at Alexei directly. Her eyes held no warmth, but a fierce, grave understanding. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was not complicity. It was a transaction. A recognition that some truths were more deadly than shrapnel, and that some secrets were best left buried for the good of the men still fighting outside. The wound is clean. You will live. Do not use the arm for a week, she said, her voice a clinical monotone. Then she turned and left, the curtain falling closed behind her, leaving Alexei alone in the dimness, their body trembling not from pain, but from the sheer, vertiginous scale of the reprieve they had just been granted. The secret was no longer theirs alone. It was now a shared, silent burden with a stranger in a blood-stained apron. And that made it more fragile and more dangerous than ever. The world after the wound was a paler, more fragile place. The shrapnel had been extracted, but a deeper sickness had taken root, a fever of the soul. Alexei moved in a haze of pain and antibiotics, their left arm strapped tightly to their chest in a sling hidden under their tunic. The official story was a bruised collarbone and severe muscle strain, a plausible fiction for a tank commander thrown against hard metal. The crew accepted it without question, their concern manifesting in small, fierce acts of protection. Moloko took over cleaning their commander's sidearm without being asked. Ogani positioned himself as a physical buffer in crowded spaces. Dead drove with an almost preternatural smoothness, avoiding every jolt and crater he could. But the real injury was invisible. The nurse's scissors had not just cut cloth. They had severed the last illusion of security. The secret was now a ghost with two faces, and it walked beside Alexei constantly. Every glance from a stranger, every official looking their way, was a potential executioner's summons. They were pulled from the line for a week, a grinding, nerve-shredding week at a reserve position, a collection of soggy dugouts and ruined farmhouses behind a relatively quiet sector. It was here, in the stagnant calm, that the pressures of the double life, compounded by injury and isolation, began to warp the carefully constructed reality. The catalyst was rain, a relentless, cold autumn downpour that turned the world to a gray-brown slurry, confining the men to their makeshift shelters. Their dugout, shared with another tank crew, was a cave of damp earth, the air thick with the smell of wet wool, tobacco, and unwashed bodies. A single, guttering lamp cast long, dancing shadows. Boredom and exhaustion fermented into a dangerous need for connection, for stories of a world before the war. A bottle of Samagon, harsh and potent, appeared from someone's pack. It was passed around, a burning sacrament. Jokes grew louder, memories more vivid. They spoke of home, of girls left behind, of first kisses in apple orchards, of the softness of a woman's touch, a tactile memory that felt alien and agonizing in this mud and iron existence. Alexei sat apart, as always, in a shadowed corner, pretending to clean a map case. Their body was rigid, every muscle locked in a simulation of masculine nonchalance. The Samagon came to them. They took a small, searing sip, letting the fire burn down their throat, hoping it would melt the ice of anxiety in their gut. Then, the question, inevitable as a shell in a barrage, came from a burly driver, from the other crew, his face flushed with drink and sentimentality. "Volkov, you're so quiet. Not a sweetheart waiting for you back in Gorky? A pretty girl to write letters to fight for?" All eyes turned to Alexei. In the lamplight, their pale, sharp-featured face looked even younger, more vulnerable. The crew, their crew, watched with curious, expectant looks. This was a ritual of bonding, and their commander's silence was a wall they longed to see a crack in. The pressure was a vice around Alexei's lungs. To refuse was to invite more suspicion, to mark themselves as even more of an outsider. To invent a lie was to weave another thread into the suffocating web. They felt the gaze of agony, of dead. They were not just a commander now. They were a man being asked to share in the common currency of male longing. A memory, not their own, but one constructed from 1,000 overheard conversations, books, stolen glances at a different life, formed in their mind. It was a desperate, interior act of creation. They took another longer pull from the bottle, letting the burn give their voice a plausible roughness. There was a girl in the library, not from the factories. They spoke slowly, each word a minefield. She had hair the color of wheat at harvest, and she always smelled of paper and old ink. The description was generic, a pastiche, but it was delivered with a convincing, weary ache. She liked that I read the technical journals, said it was quiet dedication. The dugout was silent, listening. They had created a phantom. "What was her name?" someone asked. A name. They needed a name, common, plain. "Masha," Alexei breathed, the syllable feeling like ash on their tongue. "Did you kiss her?" the burly driver pressed, leaning forward. Alexei looked down at their hands, a gesture they hoped read as painful shyness. Once, by the stacks, after hours. They built the lie with sensory details that were safe, that belonged to the library, not the bedroom. Her lips tasted of the tea she always drank, and she left a smudge of ink on my collar. They allowed a ghost of a smile, a masterpiece of tortured reminiscence. I never washed it out, wore it until the shirt fell apart. The story, simple and bittersweet, landed perfectly. It was a soldier's memory, chaste, poignant, anchored in a lost innocence. The men nodded, grunted in approval. It was a good story. It made their commander human. Ogani even offered a rare, sympathetic nod. But for Alexei, the act was a psychological self-mutilation. They had just given a name and a face to everything they had sacrificed, everything they could never have. Masha was a tombstone for their own femininity, buried alive. The phantom girlfriend was a knife twisted in the wound of their own isolation. They felt a profound, nauseating shame, as if they had betrayed some core truth far deeper than their secret gender. The moment passed. The conversation drifted. But later that night, during sentry duty, the true cost was exacted. Ogani found Alexei standing in the lee of their tank, a dark silhouette against the drizzling sky. He was unsteady from the drink, but his intent was sober. He came not as a subordinate, but as a brother in arms, a man to a man. "Commander, Alexei," he began, using the given name for the first time, a gesture of profound intimacy. He stared out into the blackness, his volatile energy subdued into something raw and vulnerable. "This story about Masha, I understand. It is hard to hold on to something soft in all this iron and fire." He confessed then, his voice low and shaking. Not about love, but about fear. The true gut-chilling terror he felt every time he peered through the gun sight, the paralyzing moment before firing when he saw a human shape in the enemy tank's hatch. He spoke of the nightmares where the burning men he had cremated inside their panzers came for him, not with weapons, but with silent, accusing stares. He admitted that sometimes his hands shook so badly he feared he would miss, that he would get them all killed. "But when you give the order," Ogani said, turning to look at Alexei, his eyes gleaming with a desperate faith in the gloom, "your voice, it is calm, like stone. It cuts through the noise in my head. It tells me the angle, the lead, and for that second, I am not afraid. I am just a part of the machine. You make the fear quiet." He placed a calloused hand on Alexei's good shoulder, a heavy, comradely grip. "You carry it for us, the fear. I see it. That is why you are so quiet. That is your burden. Thank you, brother." The word brother was a stake through Alexei's heart. The touch was a brand. In that moment, the lie reached its zenith and became utterly unbearable. They were being thanked for their strength, for carrying the crew's fear, while inside they were drowning in an ocean of terror and deceit he could never comprehend. Their calm voice was not strength, but the last desperate defense of a secret that, if revealed, would shatter the very faith that sustained him. They stood frozen, unable to return the grip, unable to speak. They just gave a single stiff nod, accepting the gratitude that felt like a sentence. Ogani, mistaking the silence for stoic acceptance, squeezed once more and walked away, leaving Alexei alone in the rain. The downpour soaked through their uniform, mingling with the hot, silent tears that finally, traumatically, broke through the ice. They wept not for the pain in their shoulder, but for the horrific beauty of the trust they had earned, and for the monstrous lie that sustained it. They had created a phantom sweetheart to prove their humanity to the men, and in doing so, had never felt more inhuman. The brotherhood they craved was now a gilded cage, and every word of trust from Ogoni, from Dead, from Moloko, was another bar being welded into place. The front line was no longer the most dangerous place. The most dangerous place was inside the sacred circle of their crew's loyalty, where every truthful moment was a betrayal, and every lie was an act of love. The quiet sector was a lie. It was the drawn breath before the scream. Their reassignment came like a punishment. A narrow, swampy corridor of land between two dense forests, codenamed the Gullet. Intelligence was vague, but command was emphatic. German armor was probing, a spearhead trying to sever a supply route. Their T-34, its gun barrel now adorned with 19 white stars, a constellation of death, was to be the anvil upon which this spear would break. The terrain was a commander's nightmare. Thick, sucking, mud-limited movement to a few semi-solid tracks. Dense, low-hanging fog clung to the ground, reducing visibility to ghostly shapes at 200 meters. The forest walls on either side were perfect for ambush. It was not a battlefield for brawlers. It was a chessboard for snipers. They moved at dawn, a gray light leaching the color from the world. The usual sounds of the front were muted, swallowed by the fog and the wet earth. The only noise was the labored growl of their engine and the sick, rhythmic suck of their tracks in the mire. The crew was silent, the camaraderie of the dugout replaced by the grave focus of men walking into a known trap. Alexei, their arm still aching in its hidden sling, scanned the shifting gray curtains through the commander's optic. Every stump, every shadow, was a potential gun. The ice in their veins was absolute, a glacier honed by 19 engagements and the living ghost of Captain Sokolov's suspicion. They found the infantry, a decimated platoon of riflemen dug into the muck at the edge of a clearing. Their lieutenant, a boy with old eyes, pointed a trembling hand towards the far tree line. "A monster," he whispered. "It comes at dusk and dawn. It picks us apart. We can't scratch it." As if summoned, the fog across the clearing coalesced. A shape emerged from the gloom. It was not the boxy silhouette of a Panzer IV or the lean form of a 3. It was low, long, and possessed a deadly, unhurried grace. The sloping, impervious front glacis, the long, overhanging barrel of the 88mm gun, a Tiger I, a legend. 54 tons of German engineering designed to dominate every tank on the battlefield. One of its tracks was already painted with a row of tiny Soviet tank silhouettes. The Tiger halted at the far tree line, a king taking its square. It did not fire. It waited. It was a challenge. Inside the T-34, the air turned to lead. Moloko's breath hitched. Krolik began his whispered prayers. Ogoni's voice was a dry rasp as he called out the range. It was extreme. At this distance, their 76mm gun was a pea shooter against the Tiger's frontal armor. They could fire all day and only polish its steel hide. "We cannot fight it frontally," Alexei stated, the cold calculus unfolding in their mind. "Driver, fall back. Use the fog. We move to position Beta, by the creek bend." But the Tiger was not alone. As Dead began to reverse, a stutter of machine gun fire erupted from their left flank. A hidden squad of German panzer grenadiers dug in and waiting. Then, from the right, the sharp crack of a Panzerfaust rocket streaking past their turret, exploding in the swamp behind them. They were being fixed in place. The Tiger began to advance, slowly, inevitably, its massive gun depressingly towards them. They were in a kill box. The forest walls were traps. The mud was their coffin. The Tiger was the executioner. Ogoni fired. The shell screamed across the clearing and struck the Tiger's front plate with a bright, futile spark. The German behemoth didn't even slow. It fired back. The world ended. The impact was a cataclysm. The shell struck their frontal slope, but the angle was just wrong. Instead of penetrating, it ripped a catastrophic gouge along their track and front drive wheel with a sound of shearing demons. The T-34 slewed violently sideways, its left track shredded, its mobility gone. They were now a turret, stuck in the mud. "Driver, report!" Alexei barked, their ears ringing. "Left track is gone. We are immobilized." Dead's voice was choked with fury and despair. The Tiger halted again, arrogant, methodical. It was reloading. They had perhaps 30 seconds. Panic was a physical wave breaking inside the steel hull. This was the end. The 19 stars, the legend, the brotherhood, it would all be incinerated inside this swampy grave. Alexei saw it in the eyes of their crew reflected in the dim light. The resignation. They had met their match. But in that absolute zero of hope, Alexei's mind did not freeze. It accelerated. The battlefield, a moment ago a chaotic death trap, crystallized into a horrific, perfect equation. They saw the creek bend to their rear, a ditch filled with stagnant water and deeper mud. They saw the angle of the immobilized T-34, its turret still functional. They saw the Tiger, confident, sitting broadside to the creek as it prepared for the killing shot. A plan formed, not of survival, but of mutually assured destruction. A sacrifice play of insane audacity. "Driver," Alexei's voice cut like a scalpel. "On my mark, you will engage the right track. Full power. You will pivot us on the dead track. Use the creek bank as a fulcrum." Dead understood instantly. It was a move that could rip their own transmission apart, could roll them over. But it was the only move. Understood. "Gunner, listen carefully. You will not aim at the Tiger." Ogoni's head whipped around, confusion and terror on his face. "You will aim at the base of the large pine tree, 10 meters to the Tiger's left, the one leaning over the creek. You will fire on my mark the instant we begin to pivot. You must hit the base. Do you understand?" Ogoni didn't understand, but he heard the absolute certainty. He nodded, sweat pouring down his face, and swung the turret, putting the crosshairs on the designated tree trunk. "Loader! High explosive! Now!" Moloko slammed the round home. The Tiger's gun was leveled. The German commander was taking his time, savoring the kill. "Now!" Dead slammed the right track lever forward. The T-34's intact right track clawed furiously at the mud, spinning the crippled tank on its dead left side like a wounded bull. The hull groaned in metallic agony. "Gunner! Fire!" Ogoni fired. The high-explosive shell struck the base of the tall pine tree exactly as the pivoting T-34 reached a specific, critical angle. The tree did not simply fall. It exploded in a shower of splinters, and severed at its base began a slow, massive topple directly across the creek, its crown heavy with wet branches. The timing was apocalyptic perfection. The Tiger, its crew undoubtedly focused on the dying Soviet tank's strange death throes, did not see the true threat until it was too late. The colossal tree trunk, a natural battering ram, crashed down across the Tiger's engine deck and the rear half of its long barrel with the force of a geologic event. The German tank vanished under a mountain of pine branches and debris. Its gun, struck by the trunk, was bent downwards, jammed into the earth. It was not destroyed, but it was blinded, silenced, and trapped. Inside the T-34, the pivot had wrenched them into a precarious, canted position, half in the creek, their turret now pointing at the sky. They were helpless. But so was the Tiger. Through the settling fog of dirt and pine needles, Alexei saw movement. The Tiger's hatches flew open. The crew, shaken and furious, were bailing out, abandoning their crippled beast. "Gunner! Machine gun! Sweep the area! Do not let them regroup!" Ogany, shaking with adrenaline, unleashed a storm of fire from the coaxial machine gun, pinning the German crew down in the mud. For a moment, there was a bizarre, stunned equilibrium. Two legendary beasts, both crippled, locked in a silent, ruinous stalemate in a swamp. The 20th kill was not clean. It was a brutal, ingenious draw that felt more like a victory. The relief was so profound, it was a physical pain. Alexei sagged against the commander's seat, the ice finally melting into a wave of debilitating exhaustion. It was over. They had done the impossible. Then, a new sound. Not from the front, but from behind. The roar of a jeep engine sloshing through the mud towards their position. Alexei turned their periscope. Captain Sokolov's pristine jeep skidded to a halt 20 meters away. He climbed out, not ducking, standing tall, a clipboard in his hand. He had been observing from a rear position. His pale eyes took in the scene. The crippled Tiger under the tree, the immobilized T-34 in the creek, the white stars on the barrel. His expression was unreadable. Then his gaze locked onto Alexei's tank. He began to walk purposefully towards them, a thin, bureaucratic smile on his lips. The external threat was neutralized. The internal threat was now walking across the battlefield, ready to conduct his own autopsy on the legend. The duel with steel was over. The duel for truth was beginning. And Alexei was out of miracles, trapped in a steel coffin, with nowhere left to run. Captain Sokolov moved through the boggy terrain with the fastidious grace of a predator that doesn't need to hurry. His boots, improbably clean, avoided the deepest puddles. His eyes swept over the scene, the pinned German crew, the monstrous Tiger buried under pine timber, the crippled T-34 listing in the creek like a wounded animal. It was a tableau of magnificent, brutal ingenuity. And for Sokolov, it was a crime scene. The crime was not against the Germans, but against order, against categorization. Lieutenant Volkov was an anomaly, and anomalies, especially successful ones, were a threat to a system built on predictable boxes. Inside the T-34, the world had narrowed to the approaching figure. The adrenaline of the duel drained away, leaving a cold, hollow dread. Alexei's body, already battered from the shrapnel wound and the violent pivot, felt leaden. Their mind, moments ago a scalpel of pure tactical brilliance, was now a trapped animal searching for a non-existent exit. They watched through the periscope as Sokolov gestured to two accompanying soldiers, who fanned out, their posture alert. He was not coming to congratulate. He was coming to investigate. The crew, still buzzing from the shock of survival, didn't perceive the new threat. Ogany was laughing, a raw, hysterical sound of release. "We did it! A tiger! We killed a tiger with a tree!" Moloko was babbling prayers of thanks. Dead was already trying to assess if they could be towed. Krolik was simply crying. Sokolov reached the tank. He didn't call out. He rapped his knuckles sharply on the side of the turret, a sound like a judge's gavel. Then he climbed onto the canted hull, his face appearing at Alexei's open commander's hatch. The thin smile was still there, but his eyes were like two probes. Lieutenant Volkov, creative solution. Field Command will be fascinated by the report. His voice was smooth, conversational, but it carried over the crew's celebration, silencing them. However, preliminary action requires preliminary documentation. I need you and your crew to debrief immediately. Starting with you. Out of the vehicle, please. It was not a request. It was an extraction. Alexei's blood turned to slurry ice. Out of the vehicle. Out of the steel womb that was their only identity, their only protection. Into the open, under the gray sky and Sokolov's dissecting gaze. A medical check after combat was routine. An interrogation by a zampolit after a victory was not. They had no choice. With movements that were stiff with more than pain, Alexei began to extricate themselves from the commander's seat. The world outside the hatch seemed vast and violently exposed. As they turned to climb out, a jagged edge of torn metal from the shell gouge caught on their uniform tunic, right at the midsection. There was a loud, ripping sound. The fabric, weakened by blood, sweat, and the earlier shrapnel tear near the shoulder, gave way. A long, vertical rent opened from their ribs down to their hip. The inner lining, the tight, constrictive bindings, were exposed in a stark, undeniable strip. Time stopped. Sokolov's smile vanished. His eyes dropped to the tear, and his bureaucratic detachment shattered into pure electric astonishment. He saw the layered bandages, the unnatural flatness, the truth laid bare by chance and torn metal. His brain, trained to find hidden deviations, connected everything in an instant. The smooth face, the calculated behavior, the lack of personal history, the preternatural, almost inhuman focus. It wasn't genius. It was deception. You, he breathed, the word not a pronoun, but an accusation. Inside the tank, the crew fell utterly silent. They had seen the rip. They saw their commander freeze. They saw Sokolov's transformed face. The atmosphere, seconds ago euphoric, plummeted into a void of confusion. Then chaos. Sokolov took a step back, his hand going to his sidearm. Out! Now! All of you! Guards! The two soldiers rushed forward, their rifles unslung. This was the precipice. This was the moment, the secret, which had survived artillery barrages and tiger shells, would kill them not with a bullet, but with a word. Alexei climbed out, moving slowly, deliberately, onto the sloped hull. They stood above their crew, exposed, the wind chilling the skin under the torn fabric. They did not look at Sokolov. They looked down into the open hatches, at the faces of dead, Ogony, Moloko, Krolik. They saw the shock, the dawning, horrific confusion, the fracture in reality. The brother they had followed, the mind they had trusted was... what? Sokolov found his voice loud and officious, the sound of the state asserting itself. Secure this. Individual. This is a grave matter of military security. Deception. Subversion of... He didn't finish. Dead's head and shoulders emerged from the driver's hatch. He did not look at Alexei. He looked directly at Captain Sokolov. His face, usually so stoic, was a mask of cold, elemental fury. Captain! His voice was a low grind of tank tracks over gravel. My commander is wounded. The engagement is not secure. Your safety is not guaranteed here. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the weight of a man who had just helped kill a tiger with a tree. Ogony erupted from the loader's hatch next, his eyes blazing, his earlier volatility now channeled into a protective rage. He positioned himself between Sokolov and Alexei, not with his body, but with his presence. The captain is correct. It is a grave matter. The German crew is still active. We must prioritize the battlefield. My commander's uniform is torn. This is not a security issue. This is a casualty. Moloko and Krolik popped up from their hatches, forming a ragged, oil-stained human wall around their listing tank. They said nothing. They just stared at Sokolov and the two soldiers with a flat, hostile defiance that was more terrifying than any shout. Sokolov was stunned. This was insubordination. Mutiny, even. For a person who lived by files and protocols, the raw, collective will of a battle-maddened crew was an unstoppable force. He sputtered, gesturing to the torn uniform. "Can't you see? It's obvious. This is a massive deception." Dead's eyes never wavered. "I see my commander, who has 19... No," he corrected himself, glancing at the buried tiger. 20 kills. Who just saved this sector? Who is bleeding? We require a medic, not an interrogation." The word commander hung in the air, repeated, reinforced. It was a shield they were building with their own bodies. Sokolov looked from one face to another. He saw no confusion now. He saw a decision that had been made in an instant, in the space between a rip in fabric and his own accusation. They had chosen. They had chosen the legend over the ledger, the brotherhood over the truth, the commander they knew over the stranger in a clean uniform. His authority evaporated in the swamp mist. He was outnumbered, both in bodies and in moral force. To press further would require violence against decorated war heroes, an incident that would be impossible to explain, even for him. His jaw tightened. The probe had met impenetrable armor, forged not in a factory, but in shared fire. He took a slow step back, his hand moving away from his pistol. The bureaucratic mask slid back into place, but it was cracked, revealing furious impotence underneath. "A medic will be sent," he said, his voice clipped. "Your commander's injuries will be attended. A full report will be filed later." The emphasis on the word was his last, feeble attempt to reclaim the narrative. He turned on his heel and strode back to his jeep, the two soldiers following, bewildered. The moment his jeep sputtered away, the collective tension snapped. The crew didn't look at Alexei. They couldn't. The reality was too immense, too world-shattering to process. They simply sank back into the tank, one by one, retreating into the familiar, damaged steel. Alexei stood alone on the hull. The wind bit through the tear. They expected disgust. They expected betrayal. They expected the end. Instead, from the driver's hatch, a large, grease-blackened hand emerged. It held not a weapon, but Dead's own spare tanker's jacket, thick and lined with sheepskin. The hand placed it on the hull next to Alexei's boot, and then withdrew, without a word, without a look. It was the only gesture that could bridge the chasm. Not acceptance with words were impossible, but acceptance with action, the offer of warmth, the offer of continued cover. Alexei, their body trembling with a storm of emotions too vast to name, picked up the heavy jacket. It smelled of diesel, sweat, and dead. They slipped it on over their torn tunic. It was vast, swallowing them, erasing the tear, wrapping them in the physical proof of a bond that had just been tested against the most fundamental truth and had not broken. They did not climb back into the tank. Not yet. They looked at the 20 white stars on the gun barrel, glowing faintly against the gray steel. Then they looked at the crippled tiger, a monument to their final, desperate ingenuity. The secret was out. Yet it wasn't. It had been absorbed, not exposed, transformed, not destroyed. It was no longer a lie they carried alone. It was a silent, sacred trust, held by 5 people in a broken tank. The woman named Anna was gone. The phantom, Alexei, was gone. What remained was simply the commander. They turned and lowered themselves back into the hatch, into the dim, familiar world of oil and metal. The crew was at their stations, not speaking, not meeting their eyes, but present. The engine was off. The only sound was the drip of swamp water and the distant cries of crows. The war was not over. The tank was crippled. The road ahead was unknown. But for the first time, sitting in the commander's seat, wrapped in a jacket that was not their own, Alexei felt no ice in their veins. They felt a terrible, searing, and utterly human warmth. The final, most impenetrable armor had been forged, not from steel, but from loyalty. And it was unbreakable.